Hello everyone, my name is Olivia and I am so excited to start this video because for this vlog, I'm going to be reading 3 books inspired by Shakespeare. I'm not going to share the titles with you in the beginning of this video because you're going to have to watch to keep an eye on what I'm going to read next, but what I'm currently reading and I'm 60 pages into and I'm loving is Lady Macbeth by Ava Reid. This is my most anticipated book of 2024. The moment that I heard that Ava Reid was writing a Lady Macbeth retelling, I was sold. I have been begging for a Lady Macbeth retelling or an Ophelia retelling for years upon years. Since I've read those plays in high school, I've been thinking about those two characters because we get a glimpse of them, we get a glimpse of their personalities and their downfalls, but we don't actually ever get to delve into their history, how they grew up, how they ended up in that situation in Macbeth and Hamlet. And we never get to delve into their very compelling personalities because the plays are centered around their male counterparts. So I was so excited to hear that Lady Macbeth was getting her own story told by Ava Reid. This is my first Ava Reid book, so I'm very excited about it. And we are currently in Glamis, which is Macbeth's land, and we are in his castle, and it feels so desolate and rainy and stormy. And all I can think of is Storm's End from Game of Thrones, and I picture myself in that really cloudy, lifeless setting, and you can feel how empty and barren it is in this book. The setting is absolutely gorgeous, and I'm loving the way that we're exploring Lady Macbeth because in the beginning you're introduced to this meek character who you feel very bad for, and you wish that she wasn't being sold off to this random man because her father made a deal with Macbeth, but she is married off to Macbeth, and you can quickly see a switch in her personality, and you can see her playing the Game of Thrones. If I had to pitch this, I would say this is for fans of Cersei. Cersei is one of my favorite characters from Game of Thrones. She's a deeply compelling character, and the way that she navigates a scene, the way that she navigates her life, and her desire to climb the ladder of the ranks in Westeros is fascinating, and it reminds me a lot of Lady Macbeth in this book because there's so many different choices and actions that she makes that feel so deeply deliberate, and she's somewhat distanced from the reader and you don't really understand what she's working towards, but you know she's working towards something. So even from the beginning you feel that conniving energy from Lady Macbeth, and I love the way that it's playing out. And I wanted to update the vlog as quick as possible to tell you my thoughts about it because the setting, beautiful, the writing, stunning. Lady Macbeth, I'm so in love with her narrative and being in her mind. She is such a cool character, and I can quickly see this becoming a new favorite read of mine, which I'm so excited about because I've always wanted a Lady Macbeth book, and this is everything I could have ever dreamed of. But I do also have a couple of books that I hauled because I don't want this vlog to only be about Shakespeare. I want it to just be kind of like weeks in my life because this is going to take me a while to get through. So I recently got 2 books, one from a library sale and one from the publisher, and I got Bird Milk and Mosquito Bones by Priyanka Matu, and this was gifted to me by Naf, so thank you so much to them. Here's One Woman's Search for Home to Kashmir, to England, to Saudi Arabia, to Michigan, to Rome, and finally to Los Angeles. I decided to pick this up from Naf because I was really interested in this memoir and the fact that Priyanka has traveled to so many different countries, and I love getting people's perspectives in the different countries that they live in, and I'm also delving a lot more into memoirs, so I'm really excited to add this to my nonfiction TBR, and I'm very thankful to the publisher for gifting me a copy. Also, the cover is absolutely beautiful. And then I went to another library sale. In my previous vlog on my channel, I went to my local library sale, and I decided to search up a couple of towns nearby to see if they're also having a library sale, and one was having one the following week. So I went to it, and it was such a big deal. There were over 50 people combing through piles and piles of books, and I wasn't really in the mood to really delve deep into the piles that they had, but I did manage to find a book that has been on my TBR for a while, and I'm very excited to read now that I reread the synopsis and I've reread the blurbs on the back, and it is Good Neighbors by Sarah Langan. So one thing that interested me when I reread the synopsis after I came home from the book sale was the fact that they're on Maple Street. And if you follow me over on Instagram, I post a lot on my stories that I'm watching the Twilight Zone. There's an episode in the Twilight Zone called The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, and that is an episode of a suburban block full of neighbors who eventually succumb to mass hysteria. And it is one of the best Twilight Zone episodes I've ever seen. If you ever want to dive into the Twilight Zone and you're not sure what episode to start with, I would highly recommend that one because it's so compelling, it's so haunting, and always so timely. So the fact that these characters live on Maple Street really intrigues me, and I wonder if this is inspired by The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, and I do think it is, but also I saw a blurb on the back that said it's a modern day Crucible. I'm so fascinated by the Crucible and also The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street because they both deal with mass hysteria. Mass hysteria is something that I'm deeply interested in, and I want to learn a little bit more about it because there are so many different instances of mass hysteria that have happened throughout history that I think is so interesting because I just don't understand how a group of people could succumb to this mass panic that can lead to fights and death and just the worst situations, like the Salem witch trials, like the dance plague of 1518, like the War of the Worlds radio drama, like Cursed Bread, which is a book that I read last year that I loved. There's so many instances of mass hysteria that interest me, and this feels like it'll explore that a little bit, and I'm very excited to have this on my TBR. I want to read it as soon as possible, but for now I'm focusing on the books inspired by Shakespeare, and I'm so excited to continue reading Lady Macbeth. I also wanted to share my outfit of the day. I'm wearing a cropped turtleneck with my Uniqlo pants that I'm obsessed with. I have it in nearly every single color now. They are these wide leg pants that are so comfy, and they somewhat feel like sweatpants to me because they're loose, they're airy, and whenever I put them on I feel so professional and classy and like old Hollywood, and I'm obsessed with it. I just finished filming a Books and Brews episode, so I thought it was a perfect time to update my vlog about Lady Macbeth, which I am over halfway through, and I'm obsessed with this book, guys. Like, this is it. This is a 5-star read. I already feel it in my bones that this is going to be one of my new favorite books of all time. The prose is so luscious. The story is so dark and mysterious. I love the gothic elements of it. I love Lady Macbeth. Being in her mind is so fascinating because she's telling us her motivations, but I don't feel like we truly know her as a person. So whenever she does something, I'm really shocked, but then I'm reminded that Lady Macbeth is a very dark character, so we never truly know what she's going to do next. So I'm really excited to finish this book because I've been holding off because I wanted to update this vlog and share my thoughts about it. But guys, this book is so good. I've highlighted so much. The writing is absolutely beautiful, and it is everything I've wanted out of a Lady Macbeth retelling. And I also wanted to say that I think the cover reminds me a little bit too much of Anya Taylor-Joy, and I'm just wondering if they were inspired by her face because it feels very similar. And I literally DM'd Anya Taylor-Joy and I was like, you have to read Lady Macbeth. I think you would really enjoy the story. I think you remind me so much of Lady Macbeth because she has white hair and really pale skin, and she just reminds me so much of Anya Taylor-Joy, and I think if this was ever turned into a film, she would embody Lady Macbeth so perfectly because Lady Macbeth is a very young character and a very stoic character, and I think Anya Taylor-Joy has the chance to portray that perfectly because, come on, she looks like her. She looks like Lady Macbeth. But yes, I'm hoping to read more of Lady Macbeth today, and I definitely do want to finish it by the end of the week because I want to move on to the other 2 books that are inspired by Shakespeare because I'm really excited about all of them, and I'm also just excited to finish this book and give it 5 stars. It's most definitely a 5-star read. I finally finished Lady Macbeth, and I have a lot of thoughts about it. I initially thought it was going to be a 5-star read, but it ended up being a 4-star read for me because of a couple of reasons. I really enjoyed the writing style. I thought it was lush, it was atmospheric, it was really dreary, and matched this gothic setting that felt so isolated and suffocating. And I thought it was interesting that even though we are following her perspective, we still feel somewhat distanced from Lady Macbeth. We don't truly know what's going on in her mind, and we don't really know what she's planning. And I thought that was really interesting because I don't think we could ever truly understand Lady Macbeth. She's an enigma of a character, and there's so many layers to her, and I really enjoyed Ava Reid's exploration of Lady Macbeth. But the reason I gave it 4 stars instead of 5 stars is because I thought Act 4, 5, and the untitled Act 6 was a bit weak. So the latter half of this book did fall short for me. There was this romance that was introduced into the storyline that I thought was very unnecessary to the story, and it kind of took away from the power of Lady Macbeth. I've always pictured Lady Macbeth as someone who doesn't necessarily feel any attraction towards anyone. She's only ever attracted to power. I think that she somewhat feels above romantic relationships, so introducing that to this story felt like we were weakening Lady Macbeth's character, even though she does deserve love and she does deserve someone who cares for her rather than sees her as a pawn in a game. I do think that this romance felt so forced that I couldn't actually believe it. And I also thought the last couple of acts for the book felt so rushed, and this story kind of concluded in a way that was way too simple for me, and I couldn't really believe that after so much build up. And I've seen a couple reviews of this book on Book Talk, and I've seen so many people trash it, and I do think this will be a polarizing book. You either have to accept that this is a retelling of Lady Macbeth, or you're going to disappoint yourself by thinking this is the same exact Lady Macbeth from the original Macbeth play. That's the whole point of a retelling, and I think having this Shakespearean purity when looking at retellings really does a disservice to the retellings themselves, because you have to have some sort of suspension of disbelief. You cannot think that you are going to get the same exact beats from the original play in these retellings, because it is their own interpretation of these characters. So if you go into this novel knowing that it's a retelling, knowing that it's not going to be completely faithful to Macbeth, because of course Lady Macbeth is 17 in this book. In the original play, she is 40 something years old. She's cunning, she knows what she wants out of life. She's a developed adult mentally, and she really knows what she's striving for in the original play. But in this retelling, we get to see this really scared girl kind of navigate this unprecedented circumstance, and she navigates it through the lens of someone who is somewhat evil, and I really enjoyed it. It's definitely not a perfect book for me because, again, the latter half of the book was very weak for me, but I enjoyed the journey that I went on. I enjoyed the fact that this is another interpretation of Lady Macbeth, and there probably will be more interpretations of Lady Macbeth. I think we have to let go of our clause in the original text and allow these authors to interpret these characters in different ways, and I enjoyed this interpretation of Lady Macbeth. I do think there are some flaws in the way that we explore power and what it means to be a woman in a society where you are treated like a second-class citizen. I think there's a lot to unpack there, but overall I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the writing style. I enjoyed my first ever Ava Reid book, and I think it's definitely worth your time if you're a fan of Macbeth, but you're not a Macbeth purist. If you're happy with seeing another version of Lady Macbeth come to life, then this is the book for you. So let's move on to the next book inspired by Shakespeare, and this one's going to be a little bit more interesting because I have not read the play that the book is inspired by. So I'm going to be a little bit more hands-off with my thoughts about its interpretation of the play because, again, I don't even know what the play's about. So I'm just diving into this book knowing it's inspired by Shakespeare, and I don't have anything to really compare it to, so I think it'll allow me a lot more room to enjoy the story, and I'm very excited to get into it. I feel like I haven't updated this vlog in a while, but I wanted to share a book that I was going to read for this reading vlog that I didn't end up reading because I DNF'd it 70 pages in. I created this standard for myself where if I'm not hooked within the first 50 pages of a book, I'm going to DNF it because I have too many books that I want to read, and whenever that happens and I'm not hooked by a book, I always dread picking it up, and of puts me into a book slump, and that's exactly what this book did, and it's All's Well by Mona Awad. This is a story that's inspired by All's Well That Ends Well, and it follows a theater professor who is convinced staging Shakespeare's most maligned play will remedy all that ails her, but at what cost? So we follow a theater professor who is dealing with a lot of chronic pain, and she is trying to create All's Well That Ends Well at her college with her students who would much rather do Macbeth instead, because that is the beloved play that everyone wants to take part in. So from the 70 pages that I got into this story, we follow Miranda as she is dealing with chronic pain, and she's talking about her experience with her physical therapists who don't necessarily care for her, from her doctors who kind of push aside her pain and don't necessarily take it seriously. But we're also following her as she is trying to maintain this air of professionality in front of her students, even though she's dealing with such chronic pain that is really affecting her quality of life. So while I did enjoy the explorations of chronic pain from the small amount of this book that I read, those aspects were so relatable, and I was underlining those different lines, and I felt really connected to that. But overall, the plot felt so dry, and I didn't feel like we were progressing the story in any way from the first 70 pages of the novel. And I also didn't enjoy Miranda's perspective because she had such a negative attitude towards every person that she interacted with. And while I do understand where she's coming from, it's not necessarily the perspective that I enjoy being in the most, when someone is so negative where any person could stand in front of them and they can read them to absolute filth. That's what it felt like being in Miranda's head in All's Well. But I did want to tell you that I'm going to scrap this book from this reading vlog and focus on another book instead, because I had 3 in mind for this vlog. So we're going to move on to book number 3 and just kind of call this one a quits. I finally started my 3rd and final book in this reading vlog, and I am rereading a book that I read a long time ago, and it is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. I believe I read this when it initially came out, so around 2017 or 2018, and I am rereading it. I am 50 pages into the novel, and I don't remember a single thing from this novel. One of my toxic traits is that I don't remember any of the books that I read. I can remember movies and shows so vividly, but for books, I cannot remember the plot lines of previous books that I read. 1, because I read so many books, but 2, because I just don't have good literary memory for some reason. I think I was discussing this with someone, and they said that we remember things visually a lot better than we do things that we read, because when we are reading, we are forming these images in our mind, but we're not necessarily seeing them. So you can probably remember a movie better than you can remember a book, because you are visually absorbing that story compared to just reading a story. But I am 50 pages into If We Were Villains. For some reason, when I was talking about this book to my best friend, I said that they performed King Lear, and I recently read King Lear and really enjoyed it, and I wanted to reread this novel to see if it hit a little bit harder now that I understand that plotline, its references, its significance, because when I initially read this, I didn't know anything about King Lear. I didn't even know the plot of King Lear. So I feel like those aspects of the novel didn't hit as hard as they could for me. But then I started reading this novel, and they're only performing Macbeth and Julius Caesar so far, and I was wondering if it was like a Mandela effect where I thought that this novel was about King Lear, but it's actually about Julius Caesar. But I did run to Google. I put If We Were Villains King Lear into the search engine, prison. And I found out that they do perform King Lear eventually in this novel, so it wasn't something that I misremembered. They actually do perform King Lear. So I'm excited to get to that portion of the novel. And I also realized that I did not pitch this book to you if you don't know anything about If We Were Villains. If We Were Villains starts 10 years after the events that occur in the university that this novel is set in. We follow a character named Oliver who is getting released from prison, and the detective who has worked on this case for years upon years is about to retire, and he wants to know the truth of this case, whether Oliver was truly guilty for the crimes that he was indicted for. And Oliver decides to lay everything on the table now that he's released from prison and his detective is retiring. So we flash back 10 years before he was released from prison, and we follow him in university where he's one of 7 students who are performing Shakespearean plays because they're all majoring in theater. It says, in the morning, the 4th years find themselves facing their very own tragedy and their greatest acting challenge yet, convincing the police, each other, and themselves that they are innocent. If We Were Villains is constantly compared to The Secret History. I actually prefer this to The Secret History. I found The Secret History to be really insufferable and dry to get through, but I find this one to be a little bit more fun. It's different because The Secret History focuses around Greek tragedies and this is focusing around Shakespearean plays. I do recognize that a lot of the references that ML Rio makes in this novel feels a tad basic, like the way that she says the lady doth protest too much. I feel like that's a very basic reference to make in a novel centered around Shakespeare. It just feels a little bit basic. And just the way that the characters always quote Shakespeare feels a little bit forced, because one character will be like, et tu Brute, like, okay, yeah, like it is centered around Shakespeare and you would expect some Shakespearean quotes to be made, but it just feels so, I don't know what other word to use other than basic and so expected. So that's one thing that I'm noticing in my reread. It doesn't lessen my enjoyment of this novel whatsoever, but it's just something that I noticed, and I think that if you were someone who was majoring in Shakespeare, you would kind of roll your eyes at these very common references that a lot of people make, but is put into this novel that's meant to be a dark academia, pretentious read. But these characters are quoting the most common quotes from Shakespeare, so it's just something to think about. But I'm hoping to get deeper into this novel today because I really want to get through it. I don't remember a lot of the plot, so it's going to surprise me as much as it did the first time, and those are my initial thoughts about it so far. I'm not losing my mind. They finally spoke about King Lear, and I have 90 pages left in the book. It's so funny how I thought that King Lear was such a central part of this story, and it's really not. So many different Shakespearean plays take a role in this story because they're doing so many plays throughout their college career. So we're in another semester, and now they are focusing on King Lear, and I find it absolutely shocking that I don't remember anything about this plot, but then I was looking at the original publication date and it came out in 2017, so that was like 7 years ago. So of course I would forget the plot, and that's what's really fun about my brain, is that I don't remember the books I read too well. So if I ever wanted to read a book basically for the first time ever, I can just go to my shelves, pick a book off my shelf and reread it and have a really good time. I don't know why it's taking me so long to get through this. I just haven't been in the reading mood. I've been doing a lot of freelance work over on my Instagram, so if you have not followed me there, be sure to do so because I have a lot of really fun content that you don't see here, and I'm really proud of everything that I'm doing over there. And I've been really busy with that, so I haven't had the time to sit down and read the way I did in college and in high school. But I am going to get some water, sit down, and finally read and finish If We Were Villains. I finished it. I finished rereading If We Were Villains, and despite the fact that it took me weeks to finish it, I think I enjoyed it even more the second time around. It's still a 4-star read for me, but this novel is so atmospheric, so beautifully written, and I love the way that Emma Rio includes so many quotes from Shakespeare. I know I said at the beginning of the portion of this vlog that Emma Rio's use of Shakespearean quotes felt very basic, but then it delves deeper and deeper into Shakespeare's works, and you get deep cuts into his plays as the characters get deeper into his works and the way that his works influence their actions and their thoughts. It is so well thought out and so clever, and I loved being in Oliver's mind and seeing this mystery unfold, because we start out 10 years in the future when Oliver is getting out of jail, and then he is reflecting upon the actions that lead up to that eventual crime and what truly happened. And I loved rereading this because I didn't remember anything about the plot, so I was taken aback by all these different plot twists that happened, and I was also listening to On the Nature of Daylight while reading this book, and listening to that song on repeat during these key moments in this novel was so cinematic. It really amped up the emotions that I felt while reading this book, and I just think that Emma Rio really did Shakespeare justice when creating this dark academia centered around a group of actors who are so obsessed with his plays that they become the characters that they embody. This is a wonderful dark academia that I cannot recommend enough, and I'm really happy that I reread it because I don't reread in novels often. I barely ever reread ever, and I'm really happy that I returned back to this story to appreciate it even more, to get more insight out of the Shakespearean references, because I've read a lot more Shakespearean plays between the time that I initially read it and the time that I reread it, and I'm just really happy with my reread. Even though it did take me such a long amount of time, I'm really happy I was able to pull through and get through this novel and really appreciate it even more at this current age that I am. I underlined a lot of this story, and there were so many beautiful lines. Emma Rio really knows how to paint a scene, and I really want them to write more books in the future because they really do have a talent, and I think that they can really delve into dark academia as their central genre, because this is such a vibe. It is so immersive. I felt like I was beside these characters as this story progressed, and both of these novels that I read for this vlog felt so atmospheric and so lush and beautiful, and I just love a book with some beautiful prose that I can really immerse myself into and feel like I'm put in those scenes, even though it takes me a little bit longer to read those types of books because I really want to savor every single sentence that's written. I still cannot get enough of them. So I hope you enjoyed this little reading experiment where I read books inspired by Shakespeare. I really enjoyed Lady Macbeth, and I really enjoyed If We Were Villains. They are very different tonally and with the way that they utilize Shakespeare to tell a really dark tale, but they both have this really big autumnal vibe that you cannot ignore, and it's the perfect time to pick up both of these stories during this season. And let me know if there are any other books that are inspired by Shakespeare that I should add to my TBR. Let me know what your favorite Shakespearean play is, and if you want to follow me anywhere else on social media, all my links will be down below. I would love to connect elsewhere, and you can see a lot more content that isn't posted here. And let me know if there are any other reading or movie challenge vlogs you would like to see from me in the future. I will see you around very soon in a new video, and I'm wishing you all the best. Bye!